This is Can I Laugh on Your Shoulder? Oh my goodness. Mattie, welcome back to the show. I'm so happy to have you.
Oh, it is my joy. You know this. We were just jabbering and you were like, let's just start the episode. And I was
Let's
like, oh,
just start
sorry
the
to take up
episode.
all your time.
No, this is so good because we were just bantering as we do, and I was thinking to myself, like, we just need to be recording this because this is some good stuff.
For
We're
sure.
going to get into the Mattie 201 in just a moment, but there's a couple of things we need to, get out here at the beginning. And number one is, as my guests know, I'm about to share this for all of my guests that are two-timers, which you actually are the very first two-timer to come on like within the same year, which is very exciting.
That is very exciting. I was thinking about that this morning. I was like,
Yeah.
it was certainly earlier this year.
Yeah, it was like
Some
I want
point.
to say like February, something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, probably January, February, something like that. So you're definitely the first two-timer to come on twice in 1 year. So that's like a whole another award in and of itself. But you are being inducted into a very, very exclusive club, and that is the Two Timers Club on this podcast. And I present you like they do on SNL with the Five Timers Club when they host 5 times. I present you with an imaginary velvet jacket that has my face emblazoned on the collar.
Yes.
And so that is what I am currently presenting you with, is your imaginary velvet two-timers jacket.
I am so honored. I receive that velvet jacket
Yes.
in spite of it still being hellaciously hot here in
I know.
Nashville. And
Same.
I don't know. I feel like a pink lady. Is that
Yes.
like,
Yes, it is magenta.
that's the
It is
feeling I'm
magenta.
having. Yeah.
Yes, it is whatever color you envision it to be. And again, it has my giant face emblazoned on the collar.
There is nothing better. I'm so
Oh,
proud to
man.
sport it.
Yes, yes. So one day the velvet jackets will be real, but for now they are imaginary.
But I have such a visceral picture. I feel as if it's real. I mean, yeah.
No, I know. Anyway, it's so fun. This is a tradition I started
I
a
love
couple of
that.
years ago, and so it's now customary when you come on the show for a second time.
It's fantastic.
You get the imaginary velvet jacket, and then you get to also give us the Mattie 201, because on your first time you get the Mattie 101, but obviously we kind of got your 101 the last time, and some things, as we were talking before we hit record,
True.
have happened since we last chatted. And that is, you brought a whole human into the world.
That is true.
Like, do you ever just sit there sometimes and stare at your baby and you go, this thing was like created inside of me, and then I like birthed it, like it came, like the whole human came out. And that is like a wild, trippy thing sometimes.
Yeah, no, it honestly feels like a surreal and like supernatural experience, which we know the process is a supernatural experience, but it sometimes I almost feel as if it's not true. Like I feel like this is a story that someone told me, and I see pictures of myself and I'm like, oh, she's gained weight. And then I see this little thing and I'm like, I still, in spite of the like C-section scar that I have to prove it, like kind of don't believe that it's real. It is truly like the most miraculous thing. I don't have to tell you. And it's just wild that I think the craziest part to me is that, like, we have an excess of information at our fingertips at all times, which can make or break you depending on how often you read and what your personality is like. And so I tried very hard in the pregnancy to get enough information to not feel, out of control, but also not too much to where I was worried about things.
Right.
So with that said, I keep being floored by the fact that women for millennia and millennia before us, this just happened and they knew nothing. Like, because for all intents and purposes, all of the information we read and all of the food we try to eat and supplements we take and positions we sleep and don't sleep in and all this stuff that you worry about for 9 months, you could do it wrong and your body just creates and protects a human. Like we don't do anything.
Correct.
It's just we receive everything that our body just does automatically, and it's unbelievable.
It really is. And I think about that all the time. And I really wonder if it's just a female thing, especially like once you become a mom, like there's this maternal wiring that kind of like almost like train tracks in your brain that just kind of have like shifted. And
Mhm.
I think about that all the time. I think about like Eve in the garden. Okay. And like, I understand that like they were in pretty close relationship with God, I
Sure.
mean, even, after the fall, we can get into the nuances of that. But like, I feel like they were probably in regular conversation with God.
Totally.
And I'm like, did God like help explain like, I don't know, birthing the placenta and like what
Mhm.
that was like,
Mhm.
or did Eve just go, what is this alien thing coming out of me?
Yeah.
Breastfeeding. I don't know. Like, is that a thing that just like Eve just knew, like
Mhm.
animals do, to just like put the baby to the breast and that her
Mhm.
breast was just going to like magically create food for it? I
Yeah.
don't know. I have
It's
so
unreal.
many logistical questions that I probably won't actually matter when I get to heaven. But like, if I'm, in millennia down the road in eternity, Eve
Yeah.
and I just like happen to be hanging out in a Chipotle together because I believe there's going to be Chipotle in heaven. If we are like sitting at the same table having chips and guac, like I might bring it up in conversation. Like I'm just curious. So
Girl, I get it. The number of times I think this whole thought helps me with a lot of the like mom guilt of like, oops, did I do that right? Because like to your point about breastfeeding, I'm like, were they just in constant pain? Like when the baby started sleeping through the night and she didn't have a pump, like what
yeah,
did she do? And if
100%.
she did have extra, did she put it in a big urn? Like you can only keep it at room temperature for 4 hours, Eve. Like what happened to the milk? Did you toss it out? Like,
Did she
okay,
cry?
yeah,
Did she
it's been
spilled it?
5 hours. I bet it's fine. Like these are the ways that I talk myself off a guilt ledge. So thank you,
Okay.
Eve.
And then also like the whole like, deli meat and no
Yeah.
sushi. Like, Eve be eating some raw sushi. Like,
Yeah.
I'm just
Mm-hmm.
saying it wasn't sushi at the time, but like
Yeah. It
I
was
have
just
to
fish.
I gotta imagine that there was some
Yeah.
raw fish being eaten. Anyway, I realize that this is incredibly random, but I genuinely have these questions, and I think that these are hard hitting questions that the rest of America also has,
For
maybe
sure.
even mankind. So
We could go in such a direction
we
here.
really could, and we won't. Obviously, we talked about the fact that you've brought a whole human into the world. So that's obviously a part of the Mattie 201. But go
It
ahead
is.
and give me the Mattie 201 as far as like what has been happening to you this year, because I know it's kind of been a lot.
Yeah, yeah. So since we talked beginning of this year, I have had my baby boy, who is so fabulous. At the point that this is coming out, I guess he's probably going to be 4 months old. And it's just been amazing. So at the beginning of the summer, I had him. And at the end of the summer, I had my second book. So two
Yes,
babies, one summer.
yes.
And it's been pretty wild. It's such a cool thing to, I guess, just have those like such an incredibly life-changing personal milestone. And for me, even though it sounds weird because it's the second book, it feels like a huge professional milestone because, I just like in talking to friends, this past month with the launch and just promoting it and stuff. And they're like, oh, how is it different? Like blah, blah, blah. And, I said my first book, Lemons, which we talked about on here, of course, is really, it's my memoir. Like it's my story. It is the Mattie
Right.
101 after I lost my late husband 6 years ago, very suddenly. And just my journey through grief and my grappling with faith through that, and what that looked like. And that really is, I kind of have jokingly said, like, that's me sitting down with someone hurting and having a glass of wine and crying about the stuff that hurts in our life. This book, which is a devotional follow up to Lemons on Friday, it's called Through the Valley of Grief. This is me sitting down with somebody with an espresso, or in your case, Diet Coke, and saying, okay, but now what do we do? Like, what do we do to heal? And so to me, it is a resource that I longed for in the year that I lost Ben. It's a 365-day daily devotional about how to find hope in suffering. And so to me, it felt like kind of an offering to the world in that way. Like, I hope it's a resource people can use. And then as a writer, it felt like, quite honestly, really validating, like, okay, this is something I can do. Like, it's not just the dramatic heartbreak story, that people want to hear, that's easy to sell. It's like, no, this was really hard fought, hard written, 5 years in the making, and it was a lot of work. And so I'm really proud of it in that way as a writer, but I'm really grateful, to have the 201 be, yeah, we can walk through this together, and it's all about community, but also like, here's some hard fought, real practical things to do when you're hurting, because I'm a practical person, so that's what I wanted.
Yeah, I was going to say that I love in the introduction how you talk about like this was the book that you wanted, you
Mm.
needed in that time as you're walking through that. And as we've both shared, like, both of us have gone through seasons of uh really really deep grief and suffering, and the reality is that anybody who lives any amount of time really is going to face grief and suffering, and it can just be so difficult to wrestle and question, and even just like I like the way that you phrase it in the introduction, like cling to the truth
Mhm.
and the hope of Jesus when you just feel like you are drowning.
Mhm.
And in fact, I have a one of my best friends also lost her mom in the last 2 years,
Mhm.
and it was really sudden. And just in kind of walking with her through her mountain slash valley of grief, like up the ups and downs of it. um I've watched her face the same things that I have in the past, and it's been helpful to have gone through it. And so to be able to
Mhm.
say like, hey, here are some of the resources, hey, what you're feeling is totally normal. Sometimes like that's all the person grieving
Yeah,
needs to hear is like, what you are feeling currently
for
is
sure.
not abnormal. Like you
Mhm.
are not strange. You are right
Yeah.
where you should be. So wherever you are, that is where you are, and
Yeah.
that is okay. But then sometimes it's really, like I remember thinking to myself, like, gosh, I just wish there was a resource that is like simple,
Mm.
to the point, and accessible in those early stages. Because like there are some books that I could recommend that
Yeah.
even now she is not ready to read. I think she'll be ready to read in a year or two.
Mhm.
But something like this, and I love how you kind of talk about just like it's digestible, and just really helped you to kind of in those or it's designed to help somebody in those early days. And so I want to break down the 4 practices that you talk about. And this is something that I am like real into right now. So
Yeah.
is like spiritual practices, because
Mhm.
this is kind of a new concept for me in the last year or so. And so the 4 are wail, connect, worship, and hope. So I would love
Mhm.
for you to just kind of break each of those down and why you included those practices in this specifically.
Yeah, thank you. That is my favorite part about the book. I mean, it's otherwise, a very traditional devotional format, right? Like 365 days, there's a scripture passage at the beginning and a prompt to pray or meditate or do some sort of small action to enact these
Yeah.
4 practices or rhythms at the end. But the reason that these mean so much to me is because, like what I said before, I think there's a spiritual element that is the foundation of everything we do, especially in a season of grief. Like, you have to be in the word, with God. Like, he is the one who sustains. But
Right.
there's also the practical, like, okay, I've read the Bible. What do I do now? And so as I looked back over like I said, probably 5 years or so of me writing these entries and working toward this book being complete, I wanted to give people something to do too. And so I looked back and I thought, like, what are these really teaching me to do? Like, what was God speaking to me? What were the people in my life who sort of mentored me and walked me through this? What were they teaching me and calling me to? Because I think there's an element of grief that you spoke about where we just simply need to feel, and we need people to validate that, man, that feeling is real and it is worthy and it is hard fought and you should cry, and we need to be we need to be affirmed in our pain, and that's important. But we also need to be called to act in it, right? We don't need to get stuck in that place of like, of course I'm hurting, of course I'm crying, because that leads to despair and depression in places that are really hard to get out of. So for me, these were 4 kind of calls to action that people spoke into my life, that God called me to, that I recognized. And so I wanted to put those out there to sort of teach everybody as they go through this book. Like, these are 4 daily rhythms that can be really small or they can be really big, that give you some agency in your grief. I think that's the word I keep coming back to. Like, they keep you not just being a victim to the pain that is rightly felt, but gives you an action step to move toward hope, to move toward acceptance. So like, when you grieve and go to counseling or whatever, there's, the 5 stages of grief is what they say. They're very nonlinear, of course, they're very erratic, but the 4 kind of phases, are denial, anger, bargaining. I'm going to forget the other bad one. And then
Yeah, then
acceptance.
acceptance. Yeah.
And so for me, when I started practicing those rhythms, the wail, connect, worship, hope, it was in a way working in tandem to sort of like help me get through those tough stages and get closer to acceptance. So for me, the wail was important because my bent, as is yours, we've talked about, is to just kind of put on the happy face and push through. So the first thing for me that I had to learn to do rhythmically every day or multiple times a day was find a place to wail. And like, the biblical word is lament. Like, that's used a lot in scripture. And it is a call to just release what is true. And the truth is, this is really painful. And I am angry, and I have to purge these things from myself before I can ever move into places, of hope and connection and worship. And so wail to me helps combat denial, might have been the other phase that I forgot of grief. So when you wail, you resist denying or pushing too fast forward through the pain that's very real. And then connect, to me, is a way to resist withdrawing. Our innate human nature, our innate like animal nature, is to withdraw. When an animal gets wounded, they run and hide, which just makes them more vulnerable. And so we have that instinct too. And so that connect is the call to not withdraw into isolation, which is a dangerous place. And then worship, to me, is one of the harder ones, to be honest, when you're in a season of real grief and you're a believer. But that act of obedient worship, when you don't feel like worshiping the God that could have answered your miracle, yes, and he didn't, which is my story, that helps mitigate anger toward God. It helps mitigate distrust and kind of rebuild that foundation of surrender to him. And then the hope obviously is what we're all going for. But I think my point in the book is, it's not like some pot of gold, at the end of a rainbow that you have to chase and maybe or maybe not find. Like, it's an action too. Like, you can hope for the future. You can pray for the future. You can claim good things for the future. And just the simple act of doing it, raises your spirits and reconnects you with God. And so that helps you move, from depression toward acceptance. So to me, it just made sense that those stages of grief, so to speak, had some sort of spiritual and practical, rhythm to couple with it, to work through the valley,
Yeah. And I love the title. And I know that had to be intentional about the idea of through the valley, because so many times I think our culture has created this expectation, or whether explicit or just implicit, that you just get over it. And that you just move on and you don't. And then there's also, I think, an innate desire within us that is not healthy, as you and I have both experienced, where we try to just get over it, and we try to just get to the other side of it without going through it. And the reality is you have to go through it in order to get to the other side of it. I love this illustration. I don't know if I've shared this example on the podcast before, but if I did, it was a while ago. But there's and I'm sure that this is a pretty common illustration and study, but it's just something I find really fascinating. And that is, that herds of buffalo, specifically in, the Midwest and into the West, they'll be together in these massive herds, and a lot of times, especially in some of those plains and those flat lands, massive storms can come up like very quickly,
Mhm.
and they can kind of appear out of nowhere. And what herds of buffalo are not trained to do, but innately, instead of running from the storm, they actually run towards the storm and they run through the storm, because they know, like, God has wired them that they are safer if they, as a herd together, run towards the storm and through
Mhm.
the storm, and then they'll be out of the storm quicker if they run through it rather than away from it, because if they're running away from it, they're kind of running with the storm and they'll
Yeah.
be in it longer. And I love that illustration of, like, that's how God innately wired those buffalo, and how for us, like, in a lot of ways, we see storms and suffering and things like that as this thing that we have to run away from. And in the end, we end up just being stuck in it way longer than
For
we
sure.
probably would have
Yeah.
if we just kind of faced it head on and dealt with
Mhm.
it. And not that, again, you're not getting over it, but you're getting through it and you're able
Mhm.
to, like, learn and grow. And so I love the way that you really, like, impart these different things into these different practices within this
Yeah.
devotional in order to do that more intentionally.
Yeah, I love that illustration, and I'm kinda giggling because I read it in a book literally yesterday,
Oh my gosh,
traveling back on a plane, and I was like, "Oh my gosh,
small
I
world.
actually know this. Oh, I read it yesterday."
Yeah,
And don't we kinda wish God wired us a little bit more like
I
that? I'm like,
know.
"Why the buffalo?" Like, we couldn't get a little zhuzh of that, in our DNA, but no, I like that metaphor because it's, you know, if you have the tools, right? If you're going to run headstrong into a ice storm, like if you've got a windbreaker, if you've got snowshoes, if you've got a flashlight, if you've got the stuff, it's not going to be enjoyable, but it is at least going to equip you to do it more efficiently, more safely, without as much bodily harm. Like, it's not going to make the grief easier, but it is going to make you stronger. It's going to make you feel more equipped to handle those really, really dark days. And I just think, if you're going to go through it, why not have tools to help you? I mean, and that's really what these are. And I think that I think, to be honest with you, I think they're as applicable in, a joyful season of life as they are in a valley season of life. I just think the more I went back through this work. And I mean, I edited and published this book in, quite honestly, probably the most joy rich season of my
Mm,
life. And it was an important call to me to not forget to do those rhythms,
yeah,
because I think they're a way that we move toward the abundant life that Jesus
right.
has for us, right? To really be honest about the pain, because he calls us to, and because he gave us those emotions as a very important purge, right? To feel totally human, and then to worship and to connect with others and to hope, and that this is where the abundance comes from. And that tiny bit of abundance can still exist in the valley. It's just, you got to work a little harder, to see the glimpses of it, I think.
Yeah. And I love the examples, and I know that you use some of them throughout this devotional as well. Is, like, I just love, in particular, looking to the Psalms during these times of going through grief, because it's just all over the Psalms. You can
Mm-hmm.
see the wailing, you can see the connecting, you can see the
Mm-hmm.
worship, and you can see the hope. Like, the Psalms just give us this beautiful template of what it looks
Mm-hmm.
like to go through the mountaintops and the valleys of life. And in fact, like, just this morning, the psalm I was in this morning was Psalm 88. And I don't have a reason why I was in Psalm 88 this morning, other than that was the psalm I was in this morning. But it was so interesting. Like, there was a couple of lines in particular in that psalm that, I mean, it's not like it's the kind of thing that applied to me today, but was just one of those. It uh just struck me for whatever
Mm-hmm.
reason. And things like, turn your ear to my cry in verse 2. Like, I'm crying to you, verse 13, but I cry to you for help, Lord. In the morning my prayer comes before me. 14, why, Lord, do you reject me and hide your face from me? Even though, like, the sons of Korah, like God is not rejecting him or
Mhm.
hiding his face from him. But like sometimes there's those moments where that's what it feels like,
Yeah.
where it feels like God is rejecting you and hiding your face from, hiding his face from you. And, just, I think there was even, I'm trying to find it. But there's like another, yeah. Uh, Verse 8. You have taken from me my closest friends and have made me repulsive to them. I am confined and cannot escape. My eyes are dim with grief. I call to you, Lord, every day. I spread out my hands to you. And just like that feeling of like being in the depths of grief, like my eyes are dim with grief, when you are just grieving and crying and wailing, and your
Mm.
eyes feel puffy and heavy, and like
Yeah.
your skin feels hot, and just everything feels, and I love that line, like I'm confined and I cannot escape. And I share that just because, like I said, it just struck me this morning of sometimes like the Psalms just show us like how raw they are,
Mhm.
and how they're just crying out from the depths of the darkest pits. And like it just gives us such an example of, we don't have to hide our
Mm-mm.
emotions. God is not afraid of them. He is not afraid of your grief. He is not afraid of your
Mhm.
anger. He is not afraid of any of it. Um, all he longs for is for you to come to him with it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and so I share that to ask you, like, as you were writing this, was there anything that maybe you hadn't necessarily faced yet in your own grief journey? Was there
Mm.
anything that you discovered in your own grief journey that you then used as a tool to write this and help somebody who's coming behind you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like this was such a full picture experience for me in the editing process because, as I said, I started writing these entries truly almost just like as a journal response to like what I was reading in that first year or two, and like what God was speaking to me. And actually, the fun fact is the entire manuscript I first wrote like in what I guess you'd call the Jesus calling voice. Like it was like God
Mm,
talking to the reader,
mm,
because that's how I wrote them, was like what I was hearing God speak to me and what I needed to hear from God. Um, and then when we went back in editing, I was like, no, I want to be like, I want this to be like I'm walking with people and kind of inviting them into my experience, and they can see hope in my story. And so we changed it. Um, but all that to say, the content is really what my heart needed first. And so for me to go back and do all the editing, this year and last, um, and see the different messages and see the different calls and see the different places of comfort, that God met me, was
mm,
really cool, because there were some that were, like you said, just like having the courage early on to turn my face into the storm, and just him calling me to do that and equipping me. And then a lot of the ones that spoke to me most lately, to answer your question, um, I think were the hope ones, because
yeah.
to me, it seems like that would be the most inherent thing, right? Everyone who's hurting, everyone who has loss or suffering of any kind, like we want to get out of it, obviously. Like we obviously hope to heal. We obviously hope to get to the other side. We obviously hope to
Mm,
feel abundant life again, whatever that might look like for us. But I think one of the scariest things to do is hope. And I think that is more true to the season that I'm in now, because it's almost like when you've gone through the worst of it and you have felt God really restore your sturdy ground, I guess. I had gotten to a place of sturdy ground with who I am, with who I was without Ben, with who I was with God before Connor and I ever got together.
yeah.
And that's the place where healing really happened. Like we talked about this last time. It's like having him and remarrying and having my son are the biggest blessings in the world. But if I had not gotten to that sturdy ground with me and with God, then all of that would just be shifting sand too, because I would be
Mm,
sitting here like, please don't take this from me. Please don't take this from me. And I have days like that. I'm not going to pretend like I don't. Like the first thing I do every single morning is pray for their health and their safety, because that's always going to be a big fear for
yeah.
me.
Yeah.
But the courage to hope is almost as scary as anything else. And so as I edited it, I wanted to be sure that one of the messages that came through is like, it's never too early to hope. You know, it's never too early to hope, and that you should, like the Psalms do, in the same breath say like, God, I'm crying out to you and you can't hear me, but also this picture for my life that I hope is true. I'm going to claim can be true because you can make it true, and you will in some way, you know, and it might look different, but just that there is such freedom in the action of hoping, even though you don't know what the final outcome is going to be. And then if you do get a great final outcome, you know, you have to fight to not live waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like, that's kind of where I am now. And like,
Yeah.
don't let Satan steal the present joy just because, you know, hoping takes courage. And that's kind of like, those were a lot of the messages that spoke back to me in the process, you know, was when you have these blessings, like, it's easy to fear for them, but like, don't let that joy be stolen. Like, keep hoping.
Yeah. That was man, hope takes courage. That'll preach right there, because I'm telling you, like, that was very much, well, I didn't, it's interesting, like after I lost my mom, it wasn't, I think because she was sick for so long, it wasn't like it wasn't this like sudden thing. So I didn't necessarily have that paranoia that like everyone else in my life was going to die. However, when I lost our babies, Elijah in February of 2018, and then Malachi in June of 2018, like having that experience of losing two babies back to back in 6 months, having to cremate two babies in 6 months, like in a time that was like sudden, unexpected, like all of those things, like that for me was this, oh my gosh, everyone in my life is going to die. And I remember, like, and I know you've experienced this, like, as you were just kind of sharing, is like, and I'm kind of sharing this, like, I don't think I've really ever shared this on here, is like, because it's a thing that nobody ever really talks about, like after somebody dies. Like, I lived in a state of just crippling anxiety for a while, to where every time my husband would leave the house, I would call him and I'd be like, I need you to call me when you get to work and let me know you got there safely. He worked like 5 minutes away. I would go through these scenarios where I was convinced that Lily and Amos were going to die. Like, and I would go, I mean, they were, 4 and 2, 5 and 2 at the time. And I would like go and I would just like obsessively check on them all night. And my husband was like, you have to sleep. Like, this is not normal. And so then can I tell a funny story that we can laugh about now?
Laugh and cry.
Did you ever watch the show This Is Us?
Yes. I actually watched it like somewhat recently. I wasn't on it in real time. So yes.
It's so good. It's so good.
So good.
It's so good. And it's also so sad. So sad. So we were watching it in real time. And spoiler alert for anyone that's not seen the show, the dad in the show dies. Okay. And that episode aired the day after I lost my first baby.
No.
Don't recommend watching. Now, obviously, I did not
soon, Molly. It is way too soon.
It was way too soon.
Yeah.
It was way too soon. Needless to say, I was 0% okay that night. And so I then, for the next few days, just would like wake up in the middle of the night in a complete panic, or I just wouldn't sleep at all. And so then, I mean, again, spoiler alert, he dies in a fire. Well, like he dies like with like smoke inhalation because the house.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. We don't need to. I have thoughts about it.
We all have thoughts about it. It's a whole thing. So, but this is one of those things that I can laugh about now. So again, in my irrational anxiety where I'm like laying in bed at night and I can't sleep, and this is like that whole week, and I'm just like in a fog of grief and just all the things. My solution was, because I was laying there in bed and I was then convinced that we were all going to die in a fire, and like everybody was going to die. Everybody in my life, everyone's house was going to burn down, and everybody like, and so I got on Amazon at 3 a.m. and I ordered fire ladders for my whole house. Fire ladders, like things that, like if there's a fire downstairs and you need to get out of the second floor window, you open up a window and you put a fire ladder in. I want you to understand that my daughter was 4 and my son was 2. Like, they were going to be able to open up a window and
go down the ladder.
40-pound fire ladder So the next day, like, these fire ladders come after I've Amazon Prime them, and my
Yeah.
husband opens the box and he's like, "What are these?" And I
Yeah,
was
in a very large package,
like,
mind
"A
you, I'm
very large
sure.
package," and he was like, and I'm over there like, "So what happened was,"
Yeah,
you
just
know,
in case you leave a candle on.
just in
Yeah.
case. So it is one of those things that we now look back and really laugh at, like the
Ugh.
irrationality of it. But it was that moment of just like in my like mind is
Mhm.
going crazy. I'm thinking to myself, like, this is the thing I can control at this very moment, even
Yeah,
though it is completely irrational.
yeah.
And so again, like just getting in that mindset of like honing in what is a real fear
Mhm,
and what is a real part of anxiety. And we
mhm.
see people with anxiety all throughout scripture. So, like, anxiety is
Yeah,
not like an unbiblical thing. It's just
no.
how you process that anxiety, how you deal
Mhm,
with that anxiety that is healthy or not.
yeah.
And so that's why I shared that example of just like one, because it's so common and it's not a
Mm,
thing that I think gets talked about in the grief process as much as I feel like it should.
yeah.
But clinging to and learning how to hope,
Mhm,
and the way how you said hope is courageous, man, that's so powerful.
mhm. It is, and I think, like, the bravery to do that, for better
Yeah,
or worse, like, is not gonna come from inside, at least for
correct.
me. I'll just go ahead and own that, and so that's why I think this book was so important to me in that, the genesis of it really was my mom's best friend gave me a little bitty book called her Healing After Loss, after Ben passed away, and it is this same format, shorter. It's just not a faith-based book. It's
Right.
like quotes or excerpts from people who had lost, and 365 days. And I read it every single day for probably 2 years. And I kept wishing, because the content was so focused on what I was going through. So it was like, here's your model, here's your shepherd. They know exactly where you're at. I'm going to validate those feelings. But I kept thinking, like, how much more powerful if these were God's words and not somebody else's words. And so that's where this came from. But all that to say, you know, the courage to hope in a very broken situation, in a very rightly anxiety producing world, is going to only come from God's word. And so, like, he calls himself the living hope. And
Yeah.
that's why. I mean, because when every single day you start or end your day or have your lunch with the word of God, then you
Mm,
start to learn the things that are true. And when you start to speak the things that are true to that fear and to that anxiety, then you can manage it and you can feel it, but you're not a victim to it. And so, like, the truth is, it hurts, and you should, it's rightly that you feel anxious about your family because you've lost these two babies and you're
yeah.
grieving that, and it's a real thing that happens. What's also true is that God is a redeemer, and he is a good gift giver, and he is a lover of his children, and he will protect you, whatever that means. And so, I hope as you go through the book, like, in a year, you can learn to speak truth to the hard realities that are true, and also never forget the reality of his kingdom, which is, like, his words are true. He is always with you. He is always redeeming, and there is nothing outside the scope of healing and restoration for him. Like, both are
Mm,
true.
yeah. Oh man, Maddie, this is so good and just such a beautiful resource. And I'm so glad that you did the work to put this together, because I know that it is going to bless so many people. And this is just my encouragement to anybody listening, that if you are going through grief, whatever stage you are in, whether you are in the ordering fire ladders at 3 a.m. stage, or you are years and years down the road where you maybe haven't processed some pieces of grief,
Mm,
like, it's going to run the gamut. Like, you're going to be on one end of the spectrum or the other,
mhm.
like, or maybe somewhere in the middle. I encourage you to pick this up. And I think this is also the perfect book for somebody who is maybe walking um, through grief with someone. And so, like,
That's a good
it's
point.
so many times when somebody like loses a loved one or just is, experiencing some type of loss or suffering, we can always do the like, let me know what you need. That
Yeah.
person, guys, does not know what they need.
Mm-mm.
What they need is for you to show up at their house with a meal or some snack and a copy of this book. That is what they need. They also need you to not ask them to tell you what they need.
Yeah.
Because that is, yeah, I can tell you this right now, little side tangent. Like, I will never forget that in the days, like when we were like in the early stages of grieving, I mean, one, meals were amazing, but I had a friend who went to Trader Joe's and just literally got all of her favorite stuff from Trader Joe's and just showed up at my house with like 4 grocery bags full of like snacks and just like quick meals and
Mm-hmm.
favorite frozen foods and flowers. And like, it was just one of those things where it was like, it wasn't a meal, but it was like, I felt so seen. And
Mm.
it was such a practical
Yeah.
thing that was like, hey, I don't know what you need, but like, here's some food and here's some
Mm-hmm.
stuff that might bless you. Those kinds of things are just, but that those practical things are so
Yeah.
helpful. And a book like this, I'm telling you, like handing somebody this book when they're going through it is going to be a really practical just sign of love.
Yeah. I hope so. That's the prayer. It just it feels like you said, the thing that I really longed for. And I think hopefully is affirming the pain that you were going through as someone who's been through it, and also calling you back to the God who can equip you, over and
Yeah.
over and over again, because that is
Yeah.
the only way through it. I mean, it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, Mattie, I just loved having you on the show. Thank you for being here. Thanks for laughing with me. Thanks for like getting deep with me
It
today.
is my favorite.
It's just always such a pleasure and a joy. And I just adore you so much. And just so grateful to be able to just be like a small blip and watch your beautiful family
Mm.
grow and show how you're just using a season of deep pain to bless others and encourage. And so just thank you for being obedient to what God's calling you to
Oh, I'm so grateful. This is just my favorite hour of the day. If we might have gone over an hour, I don't know. No, but I appreciate all that you do, and just how I mean, really how you hold the heart and the humor. I mean, that really is, man, that's how we survive. That's part of the abundant life too. So it's always fun, and it always feels so the message that my heart needs to hear too. Like, it's just
do.
great. It's a joy. It's a joy to
Yeah.
be here.
Yes. And as always, for the listeners, I will have all of Maddie's info in the show notes, along with a link to where you can pick up Through the Valley of Grief. Thank you for being here, friend.
Thanks, Molly.